on Facebook. So if you join me just now, our guest is willing to take questions if I can work out the tech. Which is not always possible for me. Anyways, let's start from the beginning. I've got this wonderful guest with us today. We've got Alexander MacLellan. Alexander is the Stoic philosopher, so he does an amazing podcast exploring those issues of philosophy and psychology that we don't often get to discuss at this really deep level, because obviously a lot of us out there are in the coaching industry and stuff like that, but when do we actually get to go a little bit deeper into that? So, like our wonderful guest last week, he is an expert in IEMT as well. So if you if you enjoyed that, but he's also been published in terms of his research into the Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience, which is incredible, and has studied in quite great detail that concept of worry and, you know, things that are affecting us right now, which is very important, but giving us that more psychological, philosophical base around all of that. So I can't wait. This is set to be a very fascinating discussion, even for me, because, you know, well, not all discussions are fascinating. I'm digging myself into it.
Got a lot to live up to here. Right, great.
But, you know, this is something like for me that I think is truly new, which is wonderful. My mum's a big philosophy fan, but other than that, I don't often get, you know, philosophers coming on the show. So I'm very excited to speak to you. And I'll start with our inspired question, which is, if you had to share your wisdom with the world in a nutshell, what would you say?
I'd probably say, first of all, that is a lot to live up to, and I'll do my best to be as interesting as you've made me out to be. I'd say my wisdom is, it's not my wisdom. It's definitely wisdom which I have pilfered, poached, stolen from far more intelligent people than me. And it is, and it is, of course, not a wisdom which will work for everyone, but it is a wisdom that I find works incredibly well for me, and also it's a wisdom largely, you know, taken from Stoic philosophy. And I think it can be boiled down into three really simple ideas.
Okay.
The first idea is to understand that really, in order to live a kind of a happy, contented life, the first thing to do is to just try and live in accordance with what the Stoics would have called nature. Now, nature can be anything. It can be the literal nature around you. It can be, you could call it God, you could call it fate, you could call it the universe, whatever it is that you want to call it. But essentially, the distillation of that idea is to recognize that, well, really simply, there's only a couple of things we can ever really control. We can control the way we think about things, and we can control the way we act about things, and everything else, it's not really up to us. So what this living in accordance with nature means, it's about kind of embodying that idea and sort of bringing our region of concern. And whenever we're kind of telling ourselves a story about who we are in the world and how our life is going, and oh, this awful thing is happening to me, or that bad thing's happening to me, or this great thing's happening to me, or whatever it is to go, well, actually, a lot of this stuff, I mean, even thinking about the current times we're living in, a lot of this is stuff that's outside of our control. So if we want to live a good and contented and happy life, rather than spending an awful lot of mental effort and mental energy thinking about all those things that we can't control, just instead to kind of focus in on, well, what can we control?
Okay.
What we call the way we act. And that, and that leads on to the second kind of really simple, but I think very intuitive idea that is found in Stoic philosophy, but also pretty much all religions around the world, I think, and a lot of philosophies around the world, which is to just try and, they would say, live the most virtuous life possible. Now, that doesn't mean like the really religious, pious sense of virtue that I think, and the kind of hackneyed sense of virtue that we're used to in this time. What they meant by that is just try and like do your best, just try and be like a good person. I always try and describe it as, you know, what's the story you want to tell yourself about who you are in any situation. You know, we're story forming creatures, we naturally make stories, and I think it's just about trying to write the best story you can about who you are in any situation. I think that's the second kind of layer and nubbin of this bit of wisdom, and I think it's a very kind of useful idea again to embody and to get to. And then I think if there was going to be the third kind of strata of this, of a third kind of level, would just be to use your time wisely. A lot of the time we kind of keep on thinking, oh, I don't have enough time to do this, I don't have enough time to do that. I'm almost like we're proud of how busy we are sometimes, especially if you live in London where I live. Like it's almost like yeah, right. It's about almost a competition of, well, how busy am I? You know, oh God, I was speaking with a friend of mine, and it's like, you know, they're just so busy with work and this and that. And there's some quotes by fantastic Stoic philosophers. I might read some out later because I love them and I keep them with me. Like I said, this is not my wisdom. This is wisdom I've stolen.
So good.
Yeah, and but it's very true that, you know, the amount of time we actually live life for ourselves and we enjoy the life we're living is very small. Most of the time we're living on autopilot a lot, and I think you see this kind of idea expressed in lots of other philosophies and lots of other self-development practices where they talk about gratitude and that sort of thing, and being mindful and being present. And so the third layer I would have is, don't recognize the part of your life that you're actually living and realize how much of your life you give away to things that might not matter in the long run. Our worries and anxieties and stresses and everything is coming from chasing a thing that at the end of the day doesn't really make us happy, doesn't really fulfill us in any way. We spend an awful lot of time giving up. We give a lot of our time away to other people, and then we're left feeling like we have no time for ourselves. It's absolutely the norm in some ways that we think that once we hit retirement age, so 65, 70, like after that, that's the time that we have for ourselves. And actually, is that the time that you want for yourself? Most of your life will have gone by then. And so that's why I think that we all think, oh God, our lives are too short. Life is too short. We don't have enough time. Actually, life is long enough. Life is plenty long enough if you use it properly. And so those are my the three kind of levels, I guess, to the wisdom I guess I'd like to share with people.
I love it.
None of it's my idea. It's all come from
I mean, it's nice to
than me.
I think you know, that's true of a lot of speakers. You know, they put their own gloss on ideas and stuff like that, but you know, sometimes we have to get back to the real ancients to think, okay, where did these ideas really come from? So like, let's unpick some of those ideas that we've talked about so far. You started with the idea of nature and, you know, really getting connected to our true nature, or perhaps nature outside, or whatever definition of nature you might have. So how can we do that better?
So that's a really good question, actually. That is a really good question. I think the first thing is to go, well, what is nature for you? So that, as I say, that comes from Stoic philosophy. So the Stoics kind of meant that literally in the sense of everything, in the sense of the universe. So you would often see in Stoic texts, like I'm not an academic philosopher, you know, in that sense of a scholar. I'm just someone who's read a lot of the philosophy and read the books and the text. But you would see the words nature, God, fate used interchangeably. So because especially if you think about the time they're writing 3,000 odd years ago, I mean, this is a very primal world. And of course, the gods really were nothing more than, I think you see this in a lot of polytheistic religions. But, you know, the gods are nothing more than representations of natural phenomenon and natural experience. So when they're saying live in accordance with nature, it's very much living in accordance with the fact the world, and or that the world is outside of your control, the universe is outside of your control. Now, whether or not you believe that there is a benevolent force within the universe, I mean, I do not believe that there is a motive force in the universe. So you can view this in a secular viewpoint or otherwise. But the Stoics did believe there was a benevolent motive within the universe, a benevolent force. But all of that aside, getting aside all of that stuff, what they essentially mean is to accept the fact that the world is random, or that it is outside of your control. So what that means is, so say 3,000 years ago, there's a natural disaster and half of your family's land is wiped away, or there's a war and you're captured and you're taken. One of the greatest Stoic philosophers, Epictetus, was a former slave. He was a freedman.
Wow.
And he had a very abusive master who famously broke his leg. So he walked around as a cripple his whole life. When he was young, so he walked around as a cripple his whole life. And you can understand why, for him, this kind of philosophy, this idea that, well, actually, you know, all of this stuff is outside of my control. I want to live in accordance with that. So, okay, this thing has happened. It's all about how I respond to it rather than the fact it's happened to me. That's what living in accordance with nature means.
Yeah.
However, I do think, it is important to live in accordance with the actual nature and the world around us. I had a conversation with a fantastic guy who does a lot of work on sustainability out in Portugal, and he's a Stoic. He's spoken at some Stoic conferences. There's an episode of that on my podcast. We had such a wonderful chat, and we spoke about how actually it is important that we maintain a connection to the natural world. Otherwise, we just forget. We forget what's important. We forget that we're this small, quite frail creature who is incredibly precious as the only known source of intelligent life in the universe at the minute. And so getting out in nature, walking around in the trees and the air, if you can get into a park, walk near a park, look at a sky. There's someone I know who's doing some PhD research on something he's calling skycology, which is the emotional experience of when you look up at the sky and see the sky for a long time.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's fascinating, the experiences people have when they have this extended period of looking up at the sky. So I think, getting out and connecting with actual nature, environmental nature, is so important because it helps you transcend your own very limited experience, and it gives you that wonderful feeling of seeing yourself as a cog in a machine that is much larger than you know, in your world. And I think that's a wonderful thing if you're struggling with problems. This is why the American Psychological Association says this, like, if you're struggling with anxiety and depression, one of the best things you can do early on is go and take a walk in nature, and spend some time out there, because it does help you it helps you transcend your own individual problem and sort of connect to something a bit larger. I think that's answered that question. I will go off on a tangent if you're not careful, so feel free to rein me in.
I've got lots of questions for you on the back of that. I mean, one very random question. I think I'm going to ask you both of them. We'll start with the one that's kind of directly linked to it. I mean, we've been relatively lucky in this country, I suppose, that our lockdown has included our, hour of exercise initially. So,
yes.
People have been able to get outside, but there's countries where that's not been possible. I mean, people have, a ticket to go out once a week or something in some versions of the lockdown. So what do you think that's done to people in terms of, obviously that's meant for some, particularly if you're living in an apartment block or something like that, that you haven't had that opportunity to connect to the sky or to connect to nature or whatever it is.
So, what's that meant for people who've been in severe lockdown and haven't been able to get outside? Even in the UK, people here have been shielding.
Yes, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so it hasn't been good. I think that's really clear. I was reading an interesting paper the other day, which was more of a position paper, so there wasn't too much in the way of hard data, but a lot of the signs are that and a big part of this is lockdown. There are really increased cases of anxiety and depression popping up in the country. Unfortunately, greater instance of suicide and suicide attempts, and also of domestic abuse. I mean, this is and also substance abuse as well. So there's we're not good at being cooped up. I think that's what people are learning. Like we are really social creatures. So what do I think the implications are? Not great. Was the other part of that question what can be done
Yeah, well, how can we heal that, I
about it? I
guess?
forgot.
No, how can we heal that going forward now?
So I think the thing to do is, in the UK, lockdown is lifted, so do make sure that you're getting outside, I think. I hope that would be kind of intuitive. I also think a big part of it as well, I mean, going on to exercise, we haven't spoken about exercise, but obviously exercise is really important. Like everyone knows, physical exercise makes you feel better. And it doesn't matter if, that doesn't have to be like an hour in the gym. It doesn't have to be a 5K run. It can just be walking up and down and around in your flat every now and then. And it can just be doing some press ups and sit ups or following along with Joe Wick's routine or something like that. Movement is incredibly important. So if you are really restricted and you can't get outside, and it's like, it's very easy to get into that mindset of, I can't do anything. I can't do anything. I can't go out. And that's when it's very important that you recognize, okay, well, I need to expend a little bit of willpower here in order to make sure that things I can do, I do that well. Again, coming back down to that thing of, well, what can I control and what can't I control? Well, I can't control the fact I'm locked in. I can't control the fact that I'm of a certain age or of a certain condition, so I have to shield, or I'm in a country, which means that I can't get outside. But how can I control what I can control? The way I think about that, and I can control the way I act about it. I can know that not being able to go outside is going to bum me out and going to make me feel down. So I need to make sure that I'm doing the right things to counteract that. So that might mean making a real concerted effort every day to make sure I'm doing 20 minutes of exercise, even if it is just walking up and down my living room for 20 minutes, or doing some step ups on a chair, or doing some press ups or some sit ups or some jumping jacks, or maybe I feel like I can do a Joe Wick's routine. I mean, I tried it once, it was nuts. But there's always agency and there's always choice in any one of those situations. We don't recognize we make that choice sometimes. And the worse you feel, the more you start to worry, the more you start to ruminate, you begin to feel. It feels more and more and more that choice is taken away from us, and we have to sometimes just be willing to step back from that and to recognize, maybe I actually have a choice here. And that choice isn't always easy to make, but the choice can always be, I would argue, okay, what are the things I can definitely control? Well, in this situation, if all I have is four walls and I can't go anywhere else, that's my world. I'm going to make sure my world is as nice as it can be for me. So I'm going to make sure I eat right. I'm going to make sure I exercise right. I'm going to make sure that I care of myself. So I'm going to make sure I get into journaling or meditation or whatever kind of practice is I know is useful for me in the past. That's what I would say to that in terms of healing it.
And I would endorse that. The exercise thing has been, I think, one of my biggest, how can I put this, as soothers, I suppose. So I spend quite a large chunk of my day on physical activity. Well, about 2 hours, and I probably wouldn't spend that long in the gym, but it's it's been nice, and I feel in a better place for it anyway. So I'm going to ask you the slightly bizarre random question that came up for me earlier, which is, do you think God is a metaphor? And I asked that question on the basis that John DeMartini's work, he talks about, he's done a long study actually on how concepts in the Bible, concepts in the Quran, the concept of God even, you can find in the sun, you can find it in nature, you can find it in I don't know that study in so much detail, but it was very fascinating. So I was wondering if you have any views or any words on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm no expert on theology, and however, I think yes, God. I think God, or the ideas of God or gods, which is why I really like polytheistic religions and polytheistic belief systems. I think they're great. For the sort of nuance and the subtlety of the expression of the individual. I think God is man, and we make God in our own image, shall we say. God is the metaphor. So there's a few different ideas out there. You've probably heard of the idea of the God of the margins, which is God was sort of made up to fill in the explanations for everything we don't understand,
Right.
which is
Okay.
why as science, so the idea is as science shines its light on more of the unknown, the need for God is less and less and less and less.
Mm.
I guess in my personal opinion, a relationship to God crops up so much because I think it's man trying to make sense what I think it is. And the idea of God or a relationship with a God or gods can be a very useful way for someone to understand their own experience and their own psyche. I think if you're looking at the revealed religions, shall we say, so Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, you've got senses of gods. You've also got prophets or saviors, usually as an ideal version of humanity. And whatever kind of negativity has been brought about by the clashing of these ideologies, shall we say, there is, I think, within, and why can people be so fierce about their religion? And I should say beyond those three religions, a myriad others that I have not mentioned here, and all are equally valid. It's an expression of the individual. I think it's the individual expressing and not trying to understand themselves and their own psyche. I think there's always a savior type of character, or an idealized version of an idealized state within that moment in time. And I think that's what God is. I think it's man thinking, well, what is? I think there's always partially an explanation of what we don't understand. I think it's partially a way of expressing what we cannot express in terms of our own emotional experience. And I think it's also partly there to be a signpost, almost, and a guide of, well, this is how we want to be. This is how we want to be. So we're going to hold God or the gods up as this ideal version in this situation. And now we aspire to become more like God in our own lives. So we aspire to become a better person within our own little tiny existence. I think I hope that's answered that question in terms of what I think God is.
It's an interesting take, and in terms of us living in accordance with what we can control, what we can't control, and really having a think about what's important, is there any ways that we can decipher that in the moment? Because there are things that really can bother you. And
do you want to, I mean, there's so many ways we could go with this, so
well, go with whichever way you want.
Oh goodness me. Okay. That's really tough. That's really tough. So I always bring it down to okay, what can we control in any situation? Well, it's the way we think and the way we act. At the end of the day, if no matter which way you cut it, we always end up with the way we can think and the way we act. Yes. So a good example of this is at work. Let's say at work, and you're getting you really want a promotion, you really want some recognition from your manager, and that can cause you a lot of stress, and that can cause you a lot of anxiety. And let's say it's that season, it's maybe between you and another candidate, and you're worried about it because you want it. Well, one way to look at that is to go, well, actually, what can I control in this situation? I can control what I'm doing, and I can control the way I'm thinking about it. Can I control if I get this? Well, no. Can I control what my manager thinks of me? No. Can I control what the other guy is doing? No. Can I control any number of things? Well, no, I can't. So what can I do? And therefore, where should I be putting my efforts and my energy? Well, it's making sure that I'm thinking and acting in the best way possible. And then let's say that I don't get it. Let's say I don't get that. It's going, okay, well, you know what? Did I control his decision? No. Did I even influence his decision? And that's an interesting place to go in. But at the end of the day, it's out of your hands. So what is it that you can control? Well, you control the way you think and act. So you need to make sure that's as good as it can possibly be. And someone might come back and say, well, what's the point then? If you can't control his decision, why should you even try? Well, you should try because it's the right thing to do, because for your own emotional experience and for your own world, for the story you want to tell yourself, do you want to tell yourself the story that you're the kind of person who just doesn't try and does the bare minimum and gets by? There's that really interesting statistic where at any company, 50% of the work is done by 10% of the people. Do you want to be one of those 10% of people? Or do you want to be the other 90%? Yeah. So so that's about taking responsibility for yourself and your own well-being, and being willing to say, independent of any external I will act in the way that I know to be correct for me. I think that's so that can also be in the case of, that can be in the case of relationships, that can be in the case of whatever it is. If you look at it in the case of a relationship, it's about going, okay, well, let's say that you and your partner are arguing a lot at the minute, and it's about going, and I think it's very easy for people to, especially in that situation, it's someone you love, it can be very fragile, very combustive, and very competitive, and very fragile, and so it can be easy to snap back a lot. And one thing you can say was, actually, I can't control how they're feeling at the minute, and I can't control how they're acting, but what's the thing I can do that's important? Okay, well, I can make sure that I'm acting in the right way. Well, what is the right way for me here? Well, it's probably actually to recognize that I don't know what it is. I have no direct control over it, but at least I can understand that something's going wrong, and maybe I can present myself as an an offended and hurt party. I can be the person who goes, I'm just going to back out of whatever kind of fight this is. I'm just going to be the one to put my weapon down and to say, you know what, whatever this is, I'm not engaging in the fighting anymore. I'm going to be willing, if you want to talk or whatever it is, I'm just going to de-escalate. So that's how it can be used in that situation. In the moment, dude, that's a hard one. In the moment, it's a hard one. I think it's just about understanding that there's always going to be an initial reflexive emotional response that we cannot control. But the minute we recognize that emotional response, and we recognize, I'm getting anxious, I'm getting angry, I'm feeling really down and sort of sorry for myself or whatever it is, we've recognized, okay, I had that emotional experience, I didn't have any control over that bit, but what can I control now? Well, I can control the way I think, and I can control the way I act, and I can start making a better decision for me in my life, and which will then be a better decision for the people around me. If I'm acting responsibly, it's a better decision for everyone around me.
Indeed. Let's take it to there's some school of thoughts that say you create your entire life. So this is kind of the more law of attraction sort of school of thought, and
law of attraction,
big subject, I know. And then you control your destiny, you control everything. So what do you think about that?
It's not a law. And the law of attraction is, so here's what annoys me about the law of attraction. So for those of you who don't know, this came from The Secret by Rhonda Byrne. And part of the marketing was this was used for thousands of years by philosophers and Roman. They talk about Marcus Aurelius in it, who's a great Roman Stoic philosopher. He absolutely did not subscribe to the law of attraction. In fact, if you read his work, it's Taoism and everything. It's the most ridiculous, hackneyed, sad life philosophy that I have zero respect for, and I know that's quite a shift, and I'll tell you why. For the first part of it, it's not even new. This isn't something that this is something which has largely been in existence, I think, since the late 19th or early 20th century. It's a rehash of what was called the New Thought movement by an American philosopher called Phineas Quimby, I believe. And this was a reaction against like Calvinism in America. Calvinism was a very austere form of Protestantism, I believe, in the United States, which is really restricting a lot of things. So this idea of God loves you and wants you to live the best life possible and that sort of thing. And then, okay, it's a nice idea, especially when you're living through a time of great deprivation, but it doesn't do anyone any good. And it's this idea of, if I send good thoughts to the universe, it'll bring it back to me. The universe, it says this in the Secret, the law of attraction. When you start sending your thoughts out and you start manifesting it, it's like you're ordering from the live or whatever you order. The universe will literally, it says this in the book, the universe will literally rearrange itself in order to deliver you what you want. So first, there's two major problems I have with this. The first is it's always selling. Let's imagine for a second, let's entertain this, quite frankly, ridiculous notion for a second, that the universe will take the time out to rearrange itself to deliver you what you want. Okay, well, what are you asking for?
Mm.
You're asking for a car or a necklace or a cafe or a job or whatever. So you're asking for what? You're asking for something material at the end of the day. Or
Mm.
let's imagine that you're asking for a partner. So the universe is going to forcibly take someone from their own existence in life and plop them in front of you and say, right, you are now bound to this individual because they wanted it. Well, that doesn't sound like fun to me.
Mm.
But also, what does it say? It's also, it causes an awful lot of problems because it says that if you haven't got what you want,
Mm.
you weren't believing hard enough. You didn't
Mm.
manifest it properly. You didn't believe it hard enough. There was an iota of doubt in your mind that it wouldn't work. So that's why it didn't work. Well, that's exactly the same kind of thinking that faith healers use and say, if you've got cancer, the Lord will heal you, but you've got to stop taking your medication. You've got to stop doing that. And then when, guess what? The rush of adrenaline goes and the cancer's still there, but you've thrown away all your medication and you start dying, and you go visit that faith healer again, and it's like, well, it's because you didn't embrace the Lord into your heart. It means that you didn't believe hard enough. And you go, but
That's
healer,
making you wrong. Yeah.
I've thrown away all my medication. It was like, well, there must be someone around you who didn't think it would truly believe. So it's never the system's fault if it goes wrong. It's always yours, and that's a toxic thing to lock people into, especially when there's a business around this. So I really disagree with the law of attraction as a whole, because it's nothing more than promoting, quite frankly, adoration for things which do not make people happy, like material possessions, a certain amount of money. They will say it's a more holistic kind of lifestyle, whatever it is. But if you look at any kind of marketing to do with the law of attraction, what is it they are selling? Well, they're selling you salvation through material wealth and goods. And that, psychologically speaking, is a horrific thing to do to someone. Not to mention the fact that if it goes wrong, so people don't get their burst of happiness from their possession they're expecting to drop through their letterbox, it's their fault, because it's not the system that's wrong. It's because you weren't a devout enough believer. No, sorry, you can go away with that. The second thing, of course, is, as I've said, it's getting you to it's getting you to want it. What it's really absolving any individual of any kind of responsibility or motive or agency in their own life. Let's just ignore the bad science that you can literally measure a thought and all that sort of stuff. Let's just get rid of all that, and let's just say, well, let's say it does work, right? Let's say that this is a magic system and it does work, and all you have to do is think hard enough and believe hard enough, and whatever you want will be given to you. Well, where's the meaning in your life then? Because meaning and fulfillment comes from what? It comes from struggle and suffering and hardship, and nothing that's worth having ever comes easy. And when you're and when someone is really in pain and they're really suffering, and I'm sorry, but I've worked with a lot of clients who've spent a lot of money on going to courses about this, or have invested years of their life into this sort of things, and they come to me in a desperate state, and it breaks my heart every single time, because who are the people who are really going for this? With someone who's having a really bad go of it, usually their life isn't the way they want it to be, and they might be in pain and suffering, and they're being sold this idea that all you need to do is think and believe and all that sort of stuff. Is, oh no, because if you're in pain and you're in suffering, you need to look at your life and why you're in this situation. And you know what? Maybe you're in this situation because of bad luck, because of stuff that's outside of your control. But if you're saying that there's no way out of it other than to just believe, I'm sorry, that's not going to happen, because what agency does the individual think they have? Where's the belief in them that they can have an impact in their own life? And that's the key thing.
They've got to take, well, I've always thought the missing piece from The Secret is that piece about you need to take inspired action. You can't just sit down and go, yeah, please, can I have my £1 million or whatever it is? No.
But let's say you have £1 million. What's the point in having £1 million? What is it?
Well, the point would be, what you'd spend it on. It's never about the money. It's about, what you think it would bring to your life.
What's the point of what you're going to spend it on? A new phone, a new car, a house that's bigger, that you buy more stuff to fill that more house. I tell you what, there's some fantastic quotes on this that come from Stoicism, and it's just, and so many of them are really useful. And one of them is about how much, I don't have it to hand here, but it's about, how much time we have a set amount of time on the planet, and we think it's so short. But why is it so short? Well, how much of it is spent chasing a bigger house or a different car or a new phone? There's a very known there's a very well known idea in psychology, but also in sociology. Marketing teams will use this. It's the idea of the hedonic treadmill, which is no matter what we get, we will always return to a base state of happiness. That's why a new phone is brought out every year, even though they largely don't do something new, because we buy a phone, we kind of get used to it now. No matter what will happen, a lot of people worry about this as well. What if I change my job, or I move to this state or that area? Maybe I'm not going to be as happy as I was before. You will be, because by and large, we tend to return to the base state of happiness.
Wow, I love it.
So that's why you need to work on your whole life rather than just acquiring new things, because we think, oh, I'll really enjoy having that new thing. Well, you'll enjoy it for about 4 seconds before you get used to it. So that's why I say it's locking us into looking at the wrong thing, a transient form of pleasure rather than a long-lasting form of joy. And we get so bogged down in that stuff. How much time do we really have to live? And what are we going to spend that time doing? Are we going to spend it chasing the new iPhone, or a car, or a house, or a title in a company? I'm not saying those things are bad. I'm not. But I'm saying, if you look at psychologically, what is it that brings us joy? What is it that makes us happy? It ain't that. It ain't that. Do you know what it is? It's relating with other people. It's being altruistic. It's having enough stuff to be comfortable. But then after that, what's the meaning in your life? People want meaning, and you don't get meaning through having a lot of money, having a particular house, having, blah, 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 blah. That's why anyway, I'll end there before you want.
Well, I know we're at time, but I have got a question in mind, if you don't mind going a little bit over.
I can go on as long as you like. I love talking about this sort of stuff.
So it's back to this idea of law of attraction again.
Yeah.
And this was one of the first stories that I had that ever framed it in that way. So I was studying coaching at the time. It was a long time ago. And there was a lady that I always gave a lift to our coaching course, which was in Essex somewhere. And she was about to get married. So she said, "You look like a stylish lady. Can you help me with where I might find a wedding dress?" And I gave her some suggestions. I met her the next month, and I said, "Oh, so did you check out, my tailor and stuff?" And she said, "No, actually, it was so stressful going there. I couldn't decide what I wanted. It was, I can't deal with all these options." So she goes, "Here's what I've done. I've read this book called The Cosmic Ordering Service, and I've left it in the hands of universe to deliver my wedding dress. So I'm not going to go shopping. I'm not going to do anything. And thank you for the peace that you gave me around it, because that recommendation gave me so much stress. I've actually transcended all that." And I was thinking, wow, okay, it's like 3 weeks before your wedding. You might want to find a dress. But I thought, well, all right, so she's at peace. I'll leave her in that state. What actually happened then is the next month I was like, "So what did you do about the wedding dress?" And she said, "Well, it was the most amazing story. I went into a dry cleaner, and the dry cleaner basically had this dress that had been abandoned, and they said, 'We think that this would really be something that is meant for you.'" And they didn't know that she was looking for a wedding dress or anything like that. And essentially this dress ended up being the perfect size, the perfect thing, and she wore it at her wedding. So now that's evidence that actually letting it go, not taking any action, and that works.
Okay. So that's okay. Sorry, I'll let you finish, and then I'll.
No, that's finished. So what do you think was actually going on there? Because I'd be fascinated with your take on this.
Well, I'd like to see 100 women in that situation and see how many of them that happened to. No, but this is so important.
I don't think I could.
But this is so important.
Yeah.
And this is a little bit like what I said. I think we might have said this just before we started speaking. In the sense that self-development and that sort of thing kind of at face value will try and reject a lot of scientific method, which and psychology, which is just so important. If you want to say something from a scientific perspective, or psychology, biology, chemistry, physics, whatever it is, if you've got theory and you want to prove it, and you go, okay, right, what we need to do is we need to take a completely random sample of people, who have no previous bias to want this thing, theory, or whatever. Test this. So we're going to test it objectively. And what needs to happen is 95 times out of 100, this thing needs to be true. Okay, so P equals 0.05. 5 times out of 100, it might not be true. Basically, there's a 5%. It could be vary due to error, whatever, yada, 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 yada. Basically, like, you've got to report it at that level of confidence. Like, that's serious confidence, okay? From a completely random sample of people, not anyway. Because what I'm seeing here when I'm hearing this, I'm going, okay, yeah, absolutely, incredible coincidence, incredible story. And you know what? But isn't that a lovely story that someone's created? There's going to be a lot. It's like, have you ever seen a magic trick happen? You know, one thing happens over here, and then it's like, oh, well, you know, I picked a card from a deck, and he shuffled it, and then the next thing I knew, the card was in my pocket. It's crazy. Well, no, actually, there was a lot of different steps that you didn't see that led to that result. And it's the same kind of thing. It's magical thinking. And so for every story there is like that. I read a really interesting article, actually. I read this I'm going to have to find it and bring it out again. It was from a few years ago, and it was about someone who absolutely believed in the law of attraction, and they used it to get their own coffee shop. And it was an unmitigated disaster. An unmitigated financial disaster that ruined their life. Absolutely ruined it. But you know what? There's just as many stories like that as that, but we discard that. That's called confirmation bias. Because we like the story of the law of attraction. We like the story. Yeah, she just left it up to the universe and it delivered it to her. But for every story there is like that, there's 10 times as many stories that are the complete opposite, that are I left it up to the universe to deliver my wedding dress, and it didn't get delivered on time, or it didn't get delivered to me, so I had to rush out the night before and buy one, or I didn't have one, or so for every story there is about the law of attraction gave me my dream job because it allowed me to open a coffee shop in a really successful area, and we had a wonderful time doing it. There's a story like this guy in this article who absolutely believed in the law of attraction. He opened the coffee shop in his era. All he tried to do is manifest it and believe it would happen. And it sent him like $1 million Canadian in debt and destroyed his life.
Dear. Wow.
So I'm sorry to be like the really negative kind of guy about this. I'm not being negative. I'm being honest and pragmatic. And I'm trying to say, just like human beings are really terrible rational thinkers. Like we're not meant to think rationally, really, and we're very bad statistical thinkers. We don't really understand statistics very well. But I think this is really important, and because again, I've seen it in my own practice, and I've seen it with people where they're there and they're thinking, I just need to manifest this. I'll believe in it. I'll manifest it. You know what? You do that. You do that. And let's see, okay, law of attraction. How about this? You think you really want that wedding dress? You think you really want that coffee shop? You really want that iPhone? Whatever it is, you think you really want that? Okay. How many people who are currently in the Democratic Republic of Congo were really wishing that their children weren't being stolen to become child soldiers? How many people who are dying of cancer are really wishing that they're looking at their family member and they're seeing in their eyes their life drip away every single day, and they are begging anyone out there to stop this horrible thing happen, and they don't see it happen? My mother died of Alzheimer's disease. Do you think I didn't look in her eyes every time I saw her, and I wished from the bottom of my soul that when she looked at me, she would see me and she would call me by my name? Yeah. And you think you want a house more than that? Where's your system? So really think about, if you are purporting that this massive universe encompassing law, like the law of gravity, is true and exists, well, you think about all that, apply some rigor to it, have a better standard for yourself, Have a better standard for your own life, because guess what? This is your story. Nobody else decides how this story ends. You're the one who decides how the story ends. And what do you want your story to be? And I think if you thought about it just for a little bit, if you ignore the sunk cost in thinking about, well, the law of attraction I've been told is works, it sounds nice. If you just ignore that as a sunk cost and you look at it from that objective standpoint, you realize you can tell yourself a much better, richer, more inspiring, more creative, more fulfilled story than that. And you know what, however you get there, maybe you really ascribe to Stoic philosophy, maybe you really ascribe to a particular religion, maybe you're completely secular, maybe you love Shintoism, maybe you love Buddhism, whatever it is. But I tell you what, there's so many different thought systems out there that understand that being human is so complicated and so absolutely wonderful. And you can engage with that fully and have just and you know what, even, and when you do that, even your awful experiences will be absolutely beautiful, and will be life affirming and fantastic, after the fact, not necessarily during it.
Indeed, you look back and
so exactly,
you're grateful for that.
I just think that's such a better way to live than to revert to something which is so tragic, and so just, you just, especially when you see it in the way I do, and you see the effect it has on people, and especially when you look at it through that lens, it can't ever, like, nobody within that can grow into a better space. There's no room for growth in that place. And if there's no room for growth, where's the room for meaning? And if there's no room for meaning, then what the hell are you doing in life? What are you doing? That's my own opinion and kind of philosophy and
amazing
take
food,
on it.
Amazing food for thought. And I do love that concept of, we write our stories every day. So what can we write that's within our control? Because
Absolutely.
that's what I'm taking away from this.
Yeah.
So
what's the story you want to tell yourself about who you are? Yeah, that's indeed. It.
So do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us today?
Oh, goodness me. Yeah, because I went a bit ranty there. Oh, dear.
Good, don't worry about
so,
it. It's very fascinating.
Any final thoughts? I think, you know what? I'm gonna give actually, so like I said, a lot of my stuff is built really on better thinkers than me. So I'd like to kind of, these are 3 quotes from different Hellenistic philosophers that I absolutely love. And I think that they can be incredibly useful and powerful for us whenever we are struggling. The first one is by Marcus Aurelius, who was one of the most successful emperors of the Roman Empire. He was sort of known as a philosopher king almost. He was a great Stoic, and his book, The Meditations, is his own private journal. So it's just stuff that he's saying to himself, which is quite lovely. This is a fantastic thought that ended up becoming the foundation of CBT, very heavily influenced CBT. Okay. And he wrote, if you're distressed by anything external, but to your estimate of it, or to your judgment of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment, which I think is a wonderful thing. That's about recognizing that, we tell ourselves these stories about what things mean and about what things they mean for us, and we can change that story at any moment. And I really like that. The second one is almost, again, this is not to go back on the law of attraction, but definitely to go on to that thing of, the phone or the wedding dress or the job or the blah, 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 which is from Epicurus, who famously lived in his walled garden. But he said something, and I've used this to myself so many times, which is going, do not spoil what you have by desiring what you have not.
Wow.
Or is once that which you only dreamed of. And that's a wonderful way of phrasing gratitude or something, right?
That's very beautiful. Wow.
Yeah. And the final one is from Seneca, who is my favorite of the Stoic writers. And this is from his fantastic series of letters called On the Shortness of Life. It's very short. It's brilliant. But there's one line in it which sticks with me, which goes, no one is to be found who's willing to distribute his money. Yet among us, how many does each one of us distribute their life?
Wow.
And that's
Definitely.
crazy. We're not willing to give away money, which doesn't really matter, but we're so happy to give away our time and our thoughts and our efforts and whatever to things that don't really matter. So I think that's just a reminder to, again, what is it I want to do with my life each day? You know, I want to be kind. I want to be generous. I want to be altruistic. I want to be a good person. I want to be courageous. I want to be a leader. I want to develop myself. That's what I want to do. Everything else, like, I can let that fall away. There's so many great things I can do. So that's what I'll leave you with.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on today as well. I know that we haven't met before today, no. But you came very highly recommended and you sounded fascinating and you were fascinating. So,
oh, good. I'm glad. I hope I lived up to that high
absolutely. How can this wonderful audience connect with you further or listen to your podcast?
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, if people want to connect with me further, they can do it, I suppose, in a couple of ways. I have a Facebook page, which is the Stoic Psychologist. I have an email address, alex@thestoic-psychologist.com. And also people can listen to my podcast. It's currently on hiatus. I'm recording new episodes, but there's a lot of back episodes if they want to listen to that, and that is just the Stoic Psychology Podcast. There's tons of great interviews with people and like proper philosophers, so not people like me, like real ones. Or send me an email and ask about anything I've said, or tell me law of attraction is great and have an argument with me. Great, I'm happy to hear from anyone.
You sound like you're well up for that.
Yeah, a little bit.
Anyway, stay safe, take care of yourself, and thank you very much.
Thank you.